I think we can go to Moscow now to hear a little bit more about what the Kremlin has been saying about all this. Jonah Fisher is there for us. And Jonah, the Kremlin condemning this. They've called an urgent meeting of the rather hamstrung UN Security Council. What is going on, reading between the lines? Are they as angry as they're saying in public as they are behind the scenes?
Well, in public, they're certainly very angry. We've heard from the Russian ambassador in the United States this morning talking about unspecified consequences of the strikes in Syria. Vladimir Putin himself has put out a statement in the last couple of hours calling the strikes an act of aggression against a sovereign state that would indulge the terrorists who've been tormenting the Syrian people for 7 years, and that the actions of the United States further exacerbates the humanitarian catastrophe in Syria. Angry words, but I think in private, behind closed doors, I think the Russians will be breathing something of a sigh of relief. Of course, the fear in the build-up to these strikes taking place had been that there might be some sort of military contact between the United States and Russia. Russia, of course, has forces on the ground. It has a naval base. But it's been pretty clear from the information coming out of the Ministry of Defense here in Moscow this morning that there was no contact between the strike and the Russian forces on the ground. Indeed, that the Russian anti-defense, anti-missile system was not engaged in any way against these missiles that were coming in. So those fears that this strike might lead to an escalation in tension between the US and Russia, and perhaps even pressure on Russia to respond in a military way, well, that's not come to pass.
Jonah, it's interesting to get clarification as to whether or not the Russians did engage any of these missiles. I wonder, we know that in Britain, there was a poll out in the last few days that said about a fifth of the British public, only a fifth, supported military action. This was before the strikes, and around 4/5 said they didn't want it to happen. There is no appetite for it. We know that in the United States, there are large sections of the population who also have no appetite for this. I'm wondering whether it's possible to characterize the Russian population in terms of the way that President Putin and the Kremlin is approaching this crisis.
Well, I think you have to firstly look at how it's being covered here and how the build-up to it being covered has played out on Russian television here. Lots of people still get their information from the TV here. And the story that they have been told over the last week or so is the Russian government line, very much that this is something that has been staged, that this is a provocation, and that it isn't, as it's being described by much of the West, a chemical attack that has been perpetrated by the Assad government in Syria. So in that context, I think you'll find that many people here are still hugely supportive of what the Russian government's doing, because they have been fed over the last weeks or so this repeated message that there is a conspiracy against Russia to put Russia in a bad place, both in relation to what's happening in Syria and also the Skripal poisoning, of course, in the United Kingdom, that this all falls into that bigger picture of the West being out to get Russia. And I think in that context of what people being told, that many people will be wholeheartedly behind the Russian government position today.
All right, Jonah Fisher, we'll leave it there. Jonah Fisher live for us in Moscow at the moment.